Hello, and welcome to the Inside Writing Podcast. I am your host, Josh Sippie. As a reminder, all of these episodes are recorded live Wednesdays, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You can sign up on the Gotham Writers website for free. Now then, on to the show. Today, we're talking with Sharan Dhaliwal. Sharan founded, developed, and now runs the UK's leading South Asian magazine, Roti, which is a platform for young creatives to showcase their talent, find safe spaces, and destigmatize topics around mental health and sexuality, amongst others. Her bylines include ID, HuffPost, The Guardian, and she was on the list of global influential women for the BBC 100 Women 2019. Her debut nonfiction, Burning My Roti, was published in February of this year. Sharan, welcome to the show.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So, Sharan, I want to start with the sort of the breaking in point of your writing career, that moment where you felt like you'd really arrived, you were doing what you wanted to do. Was there a moment where it sort of dawned on you that you were really doing it?
Yes, I would say that the moment that it really hit me was probably when Roti, my magazine, really started to kick off. I saw a lot of South Asian creatives from all around the world. So when it was when it became a bit of a global phenomenon, loads of people started sending in stuff from not just the US, Canada, but from India and from Indonesia and like Japan and from people that are in the diaspora from around the world. That's when I realized that an impact was being made off the back of just a couple of articles that I had written where I just wanted to talk about myself. And I think that's kind of when it hit me that, you know, as a editor of a magazine, that I was actually like in the world, I was in the publishing world. And no matter how kind of independent it is, because it's a nonprofit, I do it on my own. It's not anything run by a team or anything like that. It's kind of just like a side hustle. But when that started happening, that's when it kind of hit me that, I'm in the world.
Right. So let's talk about Burnt Roti first here. So what was it that was your motivation to start this up? What was this something you've been developing for a long time, or was it an impulse, or how did it get started?
It was 100% an impulse. It's not something I've been developing in a long time. So what happened is, so my career was quite weird at the time. I studied animation at university, film and animation, but I didn't really get into that. I kind of like flitted about doing random jobs when I left university. I worked in payroll. I don't know how, I can't add. I don't know how that happened. I worked at Thorpe Park, which is a massive theme park in England, and just like random things like that. And then I did start working for a video creative agency. But as a woman of color in the agency, I noticed that I wasn't really being paid attention to. I was incredibly underpaid as well. So I decided to just hand in my notice and create my own animation agency, which was during the time of like Vine, when Vine was huge. So I was creating these little short, stop motion animations for random businesses and brands like Dazed, this homeless shelter called, a homeless charity called Shelter, sorry. And just random places like that, Comedy Central as well. But again, incredibly underpaid. No one knows how to charge for like a 6-second animation. And so I kind of went from that to not really knowing what I wanted to do, being kind of a bit lost. And if I'm going to be honest, I kind of wanted to start a magazine because I thought it'd be cool to be like an editor-in-chief and just be like that person that's always on the phone and just so important and like always wearing designer or whatever. Like I watched The Devil Wears Prada and I got carried away. It's nothing like that at all. So I kind of just woke up one day and I was like, just start a magazine. So I started a crowdfunder. I already had the idea of doing something cultural because I had just done some interviews for a couple of friends that were journalists for things like Cosmopolitan and those kind of magazines where I talked about various things. Like I think the one that really hit me was when I talked about my nose job, to talk about ethnic cleansing through plastic surgery. And I realized there was a lot more there to talk about, a lot more that I wanted to say. And so when I was like, okay, be this cool editor-in-chief, I decided to do something cultural. And I was kind of like learning more about my roots at the time anyway. And so that's kind of how Roti started. And I started a crowdfunder for the first print issue And then very quickly realized that I needed a digital footprint. So quickly made a website, all the social media channels. I was just like, oh my God. And then boom, like Burn Roti was there and it kicked off so quickly. I did not expect it at all. I was like, oh, it's just going to be, maybe my mom will buy it. You know, like.
So even whenever you first started crowdfunding it, like, were you seeing a huge response? Like, were you marketing? Or were you just kind of letting it run on its own?
I was kind of letting it run on its own. I already had a bit of a social media following, not a huge one. I think maybe at the time when I was on social media, it was considered like a good amount. And so when I was marketing for it, it was to all my friends and to my family. And I wasn't crowdfunding for a large amount. It wasn't a large sum. It was enough to just get the print issue out. So just the printing costs and any costs for like a photographer or like, you know, small things like that. But because I create everything on my own, I didn't give myself any money. So I designed it. I put everything together, the website, the social media was all done by me. So the costs were incredibly low. So it was very easy to crowdfund. It was very easy to like guilt all my friends and my family to like put a bit of money in. So it was quite good. It was quite quick. The good thing about social media as well is like when it's shared, it goes to so many various places that there were some like names I didn't expect to pop up, like a British comedian who I really love. Like she threw in a bunch of money as well. And I was just like, I don't know how that happened. But that also made me go, okay, you have to be serious, Sharon. You have to actually create this now. Like people are putting money in. So yeah, it was quite an interesting process because again, there's no expectation really when you do something like that. It's kind of like, you know, your own project is kind of like your own selfish thing. It's like, I want to do this for me. And then suddenly everyone's like, yes, we want this too. And I was like, oh, damn. Okay.
So has the vision for it always been the same? Because, you know, it's got a very specific brand now. Was that always how you saw it growing up?
Oh, no. So like, yeah, it definitely was because I wanted to talk about body hair. I wanted to talk about like being bilingual. I wanted to just talk about the things that kind of bugged me at the time. And what I learned through Burn Roti from putting on an exhibition, from talking to all my friends and kind of building the community, that I was coming from a really privileged standpoint as a light-skinned North Indian Punjabi woman, cis woman, to talk about being South Asian, which is like such a huge kind of group of people. I wasn't really doing it justice. And so what happened is I ended up bringing in the voices of all these people that questioned me. So all the criticism I got, I didn't shy away from it. I was like, okay, so work with me to help make this change then. And Burn Roti has just become incredibly intersectional since. I made a point to like deplatform myself from it. So I stopped talking about myself, which is annoying, but I wrote a whole book about myself. So I guess, you know, but like it's become a really nice place now because it's where I came out as well. It's where I wrote an article coming out. It's a space where I've kind of allowed discussions around colorism and my own privilege within it, where I talk about caste identity within India and my own privilege in that as well. So it's a really nice place to like for people to feel comfortable now in all kind of areas of being South Asian, which is really a term I shouldn't have done. Like I shot myself in the foot with that. So but.
I want to get back to that in a second, but there's one thing I wanted to ask you about animation first, because I'm always curious how creators move from one medium to another. Was there a moment when you were working in animation that you realized it wasn't as satisfying as you wanted it to be, or did this just take off too quickly for you to keep up with animation?
I love I love animation. I love animated movies. I love films. It's kind of like that's never left me. I always like it's one of my things still. I have like film clubs with my friends and like, you know, I'm still obsessed. But I became very aware that like as an individual person, my skill set is very specific. And even though I studied animation, I do enjoy it. My skill set is more in production and organization and writing. That's kind of where I sit better and more comfortable and where I can accomplish better. Like I I think I also don't have like the full amount of patience you need to be an animator. That's probably why Vine was so good for me, because it was 6 seconds. I think every time I had a project where it was longer, it was difficult. I became a full tourist at that point. I was just like not happy. All my friends were just like, oh, Sharon's working on big animation, let's stay away. Like it was difficult for me. So I think it's definitely something that I can appreciate and be part of from afar, instead of like input with my own skills on that.
Gotcha.
But it was that journey that made me recognize it. And I think it was important that I had to go through that.
Mm-hmm. Jumping back to Burnt Roti. So you mentioned it's a one-person operation. It's just you. How do you keep up with that? And is that something that you foresee being the case throughout, or do you have an idea of where it's going?
No. So yeah, it's hard. It is actually really hard. But I think it's because I'm so passionate about it, and it's so fun. Like all the people I work with are so cool. All the ideas and projects are so like awesome. Like there's nothing I come across in Burnt Roti where I'm like, oh, I guess I have to do this and it's going to be long and tedious. Everything is like, oh, I can't wait, So it kind of, it inspires me. Everything that I do through it inspires me to create something else outside of it. So it's kind of like, yeah, I do a lot of work for Burnt Roti, but that energizes me for all the stuff I do outside of it as well. Mm-hmm. But it is really hard. And I do say to a lot of people when I do talks about Burnt Roti, especially, and people say, what's one thing you would change? It would definitely be to have created it with someone else or a group of people with various skill sets. Business management or accounting, because I can't add like all these kind of things. Like it would have been cool, but I don't really see much change there, because I think the good thing about Burnt Roti is when it came out, it made significant change, but it made the change it needed. And there's now loads of other magazines, loads of organizations, loads of people talking about the things we were talking about. And so I kind of feel comfortable about, it's almost like, I feel a bit like a mother. I kind of feel comfortable about like stepping back and letting my children now lead the conversation. I still want Burnt Roti to exist the same way it does, but I don't feel like I need to put more of an input in. I don't feel like I need to like grow it any further. I don't want to see it as a business model. Mm-hmm. I just want to see it as a conversation piece, and it's done a really good job of it. Mm-hmm. And it will continue to have various conversations that I feel like aren't really being had at the moment. But still, again, I don't think I need to put more into it. I think I can take a step back and mm-hmm. maybe get some sleep and,
Of course. So yeah. How did the founding of it and its growing exposure, how did that affect you as a writer? Did you lose time to write, or has it fueled you as a writer?
Oh, so it's made it easier. I think what initially happened is when I was writing beforehand, I think I was writing mostly like short stories, or I was writing random articles for friends, websites and blogs and things like that. But it helped me focus. It helped me focus what I wanted to talk about and how I wanted to talk about, what my tone of voice was. And so when Burnt Roti first started, even though I had a lot of people sending in essays and having the conversation they wanted, when it first started, I was doing a lot of it as well to help pick up momentum and have more content there. I was putting out a lot of stuff. And yeah, it helped me really figure out the things I wanted to talk about, the things I was really passionate about. And I think it is things around like I now write, well, I've taken a step back from journalism really as well, but it was kind of writing about, politics, about queerness, about immigration, and also like, the media and stuff, and I realized that I had a particular focus, whereas before I was like, oh, maybe you can write about Monica Geller's red lipsticks and Friends. Like, no, Sharon, you don't really care about that. So it did help me. It also helped my editing skills, which benefited my writing in a way I didn't realize it would. So becoming an editor, and because like the submissions to Burnt Roti were mostly people that have never written before, been published before. So I would sit with them and I'd go through the whole process of like, editing, how to write, how to structure something. And I learned so much in that process because I was a baby writer at that point. So I was like sitting there being like, hey, you need to do this. And me being like, do you need to do this? Like Googling it at the same time. So like developing myself as an editor made me a much better writer. And it really was through the process of Burnt Roti and working with all those amazing people that put their work in the magazine.
Mm-hmm. You answered my follow-up, which was, you worked with a lot of writers. Does seeing other people's writing, does it make you a better writer as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. It's like, when you read a book and you're inspired by it and you want to kind of like, I don't know, like there's this whole, I guess, this thing I had. So when I was growing up, I mostly read comic books. I was such a geek. I was like comic books and anime and like, I'm not going to go into the real world and like real writing. Like, that's how I kind of considered it. But the reality is that is what kind of like structured my writing and my thought process at the time. So I found that a lot of the writing I was doing was kind of like a comic strip, was kind of like comic book based and was very dramatic in the sense of how a comic book would be. And so it was a kind of interesting process of then moving on to essays and articles, and then seeing the way people write that and the way that people kind of like express themselves for me to go, oh, okay, this is almost a new way of me expressing myself now as well. And it's a very kind of structured way instead of like a slightly more chaotic way of telling a story. And so like reading people's work as it came in definitely helped me restructure the way that I thought about writing. Mm-hmm. And because like I didn't really study any journalism. I didn't study English. I did English GCSE and A-level in England, and I was okay. But I didn't really study anything. I had to learn it as I went along. And, reading has always been a big passion for me. So like reading people's work was really important. And I find that when I did discover that the focus of mine was the kind of stuff that was in Burnt Roti and I got people's work in like combined, that just like really informed me as a person and writer.
Mm-hmm. I want to jump over to now talking about your book, which Burning My Roti came out in February, correct?
Yes. Well, it actually came out the first week of March. It was delayed. It was meant to come out in February, but it came out, but it doesn't matter. Yeah.
It's out now. Yes, gotcha.
Yeah. And then out in the US in April. So it's awesome. Out in the US as well. Yeah.
Great. So what made you turn from writing short projects to writing the book? What was it that made you think, okay, it's time now?
Oh, yeah. I didn't think, like, I've always wanted to write a book. I didn't think anyone would let me. Like, I was like, wouldn't that be nice? But what happened is because of Burnt Roti, I ended up having a platform and I was visible to a lot of people. And because I was doing a lot of journalism and I was writing a lot of opinion pieces, people were like, oh, Sharan has something to say. And I was like, yes, she does. And so like, I started getting random publishers email me and say, would you like a meeting? We can chat about potential ideas for books. And it at first terrified me because I couldn't ever imagine I'd be able to write a book. It's a lot of pages.
Yes.
I was like, can I do that? So I kind of put it off for a bit. I wasn't sure. I wanted to think about it. I wanted to like talk to friends about it, see what they thought about it. And I had a lot of author friends as well. So I wanted to talk to them about the process and see if it's something that I would be ready for. And then I met up with a publisher and we came up with like a bunch of ideas essentially. But being me, I was like, what about a book about me? Because they were kind of like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to like learn more about the journey of Burnt Roti, how you got into that, what it's all like? And I was like, cool, but like, I don't know how much I can talk about the journey of Burnt Roti to be a whole book and how interesting really is that. But I was like, wouldn't it be more interesting to talk about like, sexuality and immigration and colorism and, sex work and all the things that like are kind of like not discussed in South Asian communities? Like, wouldn't it be interesting to have something a bit more honest? And that kind of sold them. But they were like, oh, you need an agent. And I was like, what? I need what? So, and then to get to the process of finding an agent. And again, like I was so new to the world. I didn't really know how to do it. So I met a couple of agents. I went shopping for agents, which just I felt like a princess. I was like, oh, who wants me? You know? And then one of my friends, Nikesh Shukla, he's an amazing author, and he started an agency called the Good Literary Agency. And he said, look, I know you're shopping for agents. Do you want to meet up with one of my agents and see if it's a good fit? And I met up with her, Abby Fellows. Oh my God, I love her. She has been through the pandemic with me. She's been through a breakup with me. She's been through everything. So like she became my therapist as well, my best friend. It was amazing. So I ended up getting an agent, and then we went through the process of putting everything together. But throughout this whole journey, I was like, yeah, but does anyone really want a book from me? Is this actually going to happen? You know, if we send in a proposal, are they still going to, will they change their mind? Like, you know, you're just still not sure. And I felt like I was constantly doubting myself, and I was still really kind of not 100% really sold on myself. And I think that's kind of a thing that comes with, like, you know, being a woman of color, being queer. You're kind of like always like, does anyone actually want me? And, you know, do they actually care? It's the whole imposter syndrome thing. So my agent kind of like yelled at me loads to like get me in the chair. She was like, of course, Sharon. And, you know, it was an interesting long process of me really questioning everything and seeing if it's like something that I should do or something I can do, to realizing that, you know, I've seen people and their books and I can do better, you know.
You touched on
right. I'm not going to name and shame, but like, you know.
Of course. you touched on a bunch there I want to get back to, but I want to ask you, so with the process of writing this book, had you started writing it, or were you waiting for the proposal to get accepted, or what was the process like of constructing the book itself?
Yeah, so I wrote the proposal, and in the proposal I just had one chapter that I wrote up, which was absolute nonsense. It didn't make the book. Oh my God. And I waited for them to say yes, because again, I was like, they're going to say no. And then they were like, yeah, hell yeah, we want this, and here's a contract. And I was like, what? We had just gone into lockdown in the UK. And so they were like, oh, you've got all the time in the world to write a book now. And I was like, no, I have all the time in the world to have mental health issues, not to write a book. So it was like a process of like, and it was a process of writing about my trauma, essentially, while being traumatized with a pandemic. So it was I was basically doing my own therapy with the book, which was actually like amazing at the end. It was phenomenal. I didn't realize it was something I truly needed. The process itself was, it was a mess. Oh, it was chaos. It truly was. I, again, had never written a book before. I didn't really know how people do it. I was like, oh, do you do the order of the chapters? Do you just like put things, like, how do you put it together? If you send something to someone, does it need to be perfect? And if it doesn't, does that look really bad on you? And I would just like panic about everything. And that would make, I don't know, that would make everything worse, I suppose. So yeah, it was a fun, chaotic process of a pandemic and writing a book, and then mental health just swirling all the way through it.
And how did that, I mean, aside from it being more difficult, how did it differ from the short pieces that you were used to writing?
So like, interestingly, a lot of it, so the book itself is kind of like put into these chapters that are essentially essays. They can be individual essays in a sense. And they have, I interview a bunch of people in the book as well. So the interviews break it up quite a lot to like form almost like a continuation of an essay. So that was easy. That was good. That kind of made me feel a lot more comfortable, because I was like, okay, cool, I'm used to this. But there was the process of, like, when a chapter ends, the book doesn't end. You still have to continue the conversation. So like, how do you then have the segue of that conversation to the next one? Like, you can't just be like, and now, you know, you have to still like, so it was still hard. It was still hard for me to do. And then also to organize the chapters in a way that made sense as well, for it to flow like a story, because I wanted it to be essays, but I wanted the whole thing to like itself have like, you know, the beginning, middle and end. So it was a bit of work, a bit of restructuring to try and figure that out. But it truly did help me, like knowing that it was like essays, like I am used to, because I knew that if I went in to write one big story, I would find it a lot more difficult, and I think I needed a lot more practice before I get to that stage. So yeah, that's how I sold it as well, and I think they kind of were like, yeah, this will be easier for her. So yeah.
So we had an audience question that's actually exactly what I was going to ask next, which is, as far as the structure of it goes, how much input did your agent have in the structuring and the writing of your book?
Oh, none. I said to them from the start, I was like, okay, so the whole team, except for my agent, the whole team on the publisher side are South Asian women. And that's how I wanted it. I wanted them to be part of the book. But I was the only queer person involved in the book, and except for the illustrator that I found. But I wanted to, I told them basically that this is a British Indian book, but the whole concept is about queerness. It's about how it feels to be British Asian and queer, not just British Indian, sorry. So I said to them, you can have ideas, you can have like stories that you tell me about things that feel familiar to you, but essentially it won't be the same thing you want. And I recognized at one point there was someone I was talking to in the publishing team that said, it would be really nice if we had this thing here. And I think they said specifically they wanted more stuff about Bollywood or something in there. And I was like, yeah, cool. But there's like a ton of stuff out there about Bollywood. I don't really care that much. It's definitely not queer. I don't see it. I just don't see it. So I straight up was just like, I'm not doing it. I'm sorry. But here's all the stuff I've written. And I understand it. It's like not 100% how you envisioned it, but that's not what you bought when you bought my book. You know, you bought the queerness of it. You bought the kind of like, you know, the identity kind of like conflict within South Asian culture as a queer person. So they understood, though. They didn't really fight me on too much. I think like they recognized that, I don't know, not that I wouldn't finish the book, but like my passion came from that and they recognized it. So they were kind of like, it would be a better book if we just let her get on with it. If we keep interrupting and saying, what about this? Then she'll just like get frazzled and tell us to piss off. So yeah.
That's interesting, because especially given that this was your first time going through this process, where did you sort of get that confidence to know that you were going to tell this better than what their input could do?
Because it was just my story. So it was my story in the sense that I talk about myself throughout, which is, you know, something that I'm very comfortable doing because I do it on social media. I'm very open and transparent. There's very little I hide about my life, which a lot of my exes aren't happy with, but you know, that's what you get for being an ex. But like, I've just always been really open, and I've always had I've never had anything in me that stops me from saying something, unless of course, you know, it damages or hurts someone, you know? So it was very easy for me to say, well, I've talked about this loads already. I want to delve into it a bit more here with structure, with this research, and then this person's interview, and then a reference from this book, which is something that I didn't really have in my conversations before, you know? I just dug deeper. And I think that's kind of what I always wanted to do. I felt like maybe when I do write my essays, they stop at a certain time because there's a word limit. And I still have so much to say. I still want to be like, yeah, but have you looked at these archives? And then this person wrote this and referenced it. And like, you know, there's still so much more to develop on any of the points I've discussed. And even now in the book, there's still 1,000 more things to be said about everything I've written about. And so I think I've always had that in me, where I've known that everything I've said needs 1,000 more words on top of everything else, you know? And I guess I had the words in my brain already. So when it came to writing, they just kind of flowed out. There was no issue there, I think. I hope it makes sense. Anyway.
So writing about, given how personal writing a memoir is in general, I know for a lot of people that it's hard to navigate those personal experiences. For you, it sounds like, I mean, given that you've been doing this on social media, is that something that you sort of embraced, or was it still hard navigating all of those experiences that you're writing about?
I think it's harder when you have to write a book about it and really go deep down into it, and it becomes like therapeutic in a sense. I think then it's harder when you have to confront yourself a lot more. Instead of being like, I'm open and transparent, here's this thing about me. Like, so I talk a lot about body hair on social media where I'm like, I don't shave, I don't care kind of thing. But when I have to then go into like, I guess like, the history behind it, the history behind marketing, the way that people of color have been described when it comes to marketing, the way that historically it has harmed people, where suicides have happened, where like, it has harmed people I know in the way that they live. When you go deep down into things like that, then it becomes a bit harder. Then it becomes a bit more, it's something to face a bit more. Instead of being like, body hair is great, it's now like, yeah, body hair is great now, but it wasn't. And these are the reasons why. And I think we need to talk about it because it's really horrible. And so, yeah, I think delving into things a lot more was harder to confront as well, when it comes to like confronting yourself and the things that I've been implicit to in my life, when I've allowed for things to happen. And I've been very transparent about that in the book as well, where I've kind of just like outed myself every now and then as like a terrible person, because, we've all done terrible things, right? But what that ended up doing is it was hard to do. And then that made me feel like a better person afterwards. That made me feel stronger. And made me feel like I could confront more and fight more afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So, there's one quote from a review of Burning My Roti that I really liked, where it called it part memoir, part guidebook. Is that sort of how you set out to write it, or did it just kind of happen that way?
I didn't. So I said from the start, I don't want it to be a self-help book because, I don't really like self-help books. And also, I don't think I'm at any level of ability to help people in that sense. Like, no one should listen to me when it comes to like help, like, go seek professional help, not this person. So I was like, I don't want self-help, but what I want to do is I just want to outline the things that I've been through, that some people may be able to recognize parts of it. And then I want to talk about my progress, how I've learned, the journey I've gone through, the things I've seen, the people I've spoken to. And then the conclusions I've come to. And then when people read it, I want them to then like pick what they can and what they want and what is relevant to them, and then piece their own story together and then their own conclusions and their own journey. So I think like part memoir, because it's about me. But part guide. I think guide was like easier to say than like self-help book or whatever. It's kind of a guide of how to confront things in your own individual way, without someone telling you how to do it. You go through your own process, I suppose, when you read it. I absolutely do not tell you. I say things like, you should stand up to things and hold people accountable, and, and it's just all very normal things. I don't go beyond that because, I'm the one that needs the self-help. So
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I want to go back because you mentioned imposter syndrome, and I feel like that's something that all writers face in some way or another. So especially, you mentioned how you struggled with it during the process of writing the book. Was there ever a point where it subsided, or you still face it today? And how do you face it?
I think there are times where I was like, no, I'm the right person for this. Of course I am. And this is fine. I've been doing this for a while. Like you come up, I guess you have good days. So I had a good day every now and then. But the reality is like, it's mostly just imposter syndrome. Just like, you're dealing with it. And I still have it. The book's out and it's doing well and people like it. And I'm like, do they? You still have like imposter. And I'm also like, oh, but no one wants another one. This is it, right? Like, or like, what am I going to do next now that this is done? Because no one's going to want anything else after this. They're like done with Sharan now. We've ticked our diversity boxes. We don't need her for anything else now, kind of thing. You do this to yourself. You do, like you said, pretty much all writers have it. Most creative people I know have it 100%. And it's very hard to deal with, but I'm a very stubborn person. I'm incredibly stubborn. And like, it's not just from friends that say that, but like, people I've worked with and even like agencies I've worked with and clients and stuff. And they say it in a positive way, which I realized is something that I need to embrace. Like, I am stubborn, but positively stubborn, because I don't let anything stop me. Because otherwise Burnt Roti won't be where it is. I wouldn't be writing. I wouldn't have written this book. I wouldn't be here having this conversation. I would have let so many things stop me from getting to the stage I'm at. And it's just because I don't like it when people say you can't do something. It kind of makes me a bit like, I'm going to have to do it now. Don't tell me I can't do something, because then I'll just go ahead and do it. It doesn't work with my parents, because when they were like, be a doctor, I was like, no. No, not to that extreme. But like, yeah, so I get really stubborn, and I want to show people up. I want to show that they're wrong about me and people like me. And so I guess that's where my imposter syndrome, like that's what it butts heads, whatever.
Yes.
I'm all right. So yeah, so I guess that's kind of like what ends up happening. But it's a constant battle. It's a constant battle where you're just like, you have the good days where you're like, no, I'm doing it and it's fine. And people like me and they like the stuff I do and the things I say. And then the next day you're just like, yeah, literally everyone hates you, Sharan.
So I have to ask, because you brought it up, do you have another book project in you? Is there going to be a second one? Have you thought about that? Or are you just kind of, let's see what happens?
I am putting proposals together for 2 books that I want to put out there. I am done with talking about myself. I've done a whole book. That's enough. I can't do more than that. I want to do YA. I want to go into like graphic novels. I want to do the things that people essentially don't want me to do, because they want me to talk about being brown and being queer. And I'm like, I want to talk about I want to do sci-fi, I want to do horror. I want to do cool stuff. So I'm putting together proposals to do that, which I'm sending out. One is out there at the moment, so we'll see what happens. But there are publishers that are contacting me about writing random stories as well, and they're very aware that I don't want to do nonfiction anymore. So I think that's going to be my journey now. And I still am going to have because I'm that person, there's still going to be all the kind of the queerness in it, the brownness in it. There's going to be talks about immigration within it. It's going to be politicized to a certain extent, because I can't escape that part of me. Even if I do something if I do a book like a vampire book, it will still be the most ethnically diverse vampire book you will ever come across, and everyone's going to be gay, so I will still have that part of me in there, and I will still represent to a certain extent, but I want to still tell fun stories and cute stories and messed up stories, so I think that's the path I'm going down. So yeah.
I want to rewind even further in your writing journey here, because it sounds like you have a very good sense of who you are and what you want to do as a writer. So I'm curious, when did you start writing, and how soon did you realize what kind of writing you wanted to do?
Oh, so I actually, that's a good question. No one's asked me that before. So
yay.
I actually started writing in my early teens. I would write these short stories that I never showed anyone. I remember one being, it was in my late teens, I think. I wrote one that was based around American Psycho, but it was a murder that we hadn't heard of yet, that he had done. And that's when I was like, oh, you're a bit messed up in the head, Sharan. And I kind of was like, oh, but it's a messed up story, but you've made it a bit silly and a bit funny and a bit weird. And I was like, this is interesting. And that's kind of when I was like, oh, I really enjoy this. And I wanted to write more short stories that were a bit kind of weird, I just thought it'd be cute. And I just kept doing that. I kept writing weird short stories, but I never showed anyone. And that went on for years and years and years. And I think then one day someone said to me oh no, yeah, it was an ex that I did end up showing a short story to. And then they were just like, oh, this is actually quite good. And I was like, all right, don't act so surprised. But then that kind of made me go, okay, if someone actually thinks it's good, that's really great. And then a couple of friends had blogs. And so I'd be like, oh, can I write an article about top 10 horror films on Netflix? And they were like, yeah, of course. And I was like, oh, cool. Oh my God, I guess this is a thing. And it kind of progressed from there. And I've always liked storytelling, and it's always been part of my life in the sense of the shows I watch as well, the way they tell stories is something that I kind of was very, I guess, I focused on, and being a a collector of comic books and then graphic novels. I really was involved in like, sci-fi and, telling fantastical stories and that kind of thing. And then when it came to like Burn Roti, it was like being brought down to back to earth and reality. And now I think my journey now is bringing those two worlds together. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm most excited. That's where I think that I sit more comfortably, Mm-hmm.
So whenever you first started writing those short stories, what were you trying to accomplish? Were you just having fun? Was it just something that you realized you enjoyed doing?
Yeah. So it was basically, I guess, thoughts and ideas. So I would just come up with an idea and be like, what do I do with this now? You just sit there and be like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? And you just be like, yep. And that's it. And I was like, well, just write it down. Right. So I'd then write down like a cool idea, or like I would read a poem and the poem would like visualize something in my head and it would create a story further down, what happens further down in the poem. Like I would continue it. And so then I'd write the story of what happens after the poem ends, so I just have these like ideas and thoughts and I didn't know where they go. So I had like hundreds of like Word documents on my computer that no one has ever read. And I've lost now, which I don't mind, but wouldn't it be cute, right? Actually, my dad found one and printed it out the other day and showed it to me. And I was like, how did you get this? That's so surreal. I think he's one of those guys that has like USB sticks and he has floppy disks as well. Like he's ancient. So he found one and it was about like, before I even came out, it was about like queer love, which I found really fascinating, that I was writing about that at such a young age. But yeah, it was just thoughts and ideas, and something would pop in my head and be like, oh, that's cool. And then I just like type it out. And then I just sit there being like, cool, did that. And then like close the document and walk off. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think that like, anything would come of it, or that I would be able to create something off the back of it. I thought it was just almost like a brain dump, So yeah, it was weird. And I guess like looking back now, it makes sense that I am a storyteller now. Like I like telling stories and I like writing and editing and I like guiding voices, and that's kind of what I do in my job, whether it's like any community work I do, any organizing work I do, it's like kind of to help guide a voice. So whether it's my own or someone else's, I realize that's a big part of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was there a point when writing became more to you than just a thought dump, like a point where you realized that this is what you want to be doing?
Yeah, and I think it came really late. Because I grew up in a family that didn't believe writing was a job that you could have. When I went to do film and animation, like my parents were pissed. They were like, what? Like, what's that going to do for you? And I was like, at the time, I didn't even know myself. I was like, I don't know, it'd be fun. Like I didn't really see a career there either. I wasn't really sure. But I think it took me a long time because I was just told for so long that writing wouldn't be something I could go down. It wouldn't be something I could be accomplished in or successful, something that I would be able to call myself. Like, Sharan Dhaliwal, a writer, they'd be like, no. Like either Sharan Dhaliwal, a housewife, like I can't even imagine. Oh my God. Like I would burn down every house I was a housewife in. Like I'm glad that never happened. Or like, Sharan Dhaliwal, a pharmacist, or like, a nurse, or like all that kind of stuff, which, amazing professions, and like props to the people that do that, but it's just never been my path. I've just never had that journey in me. And so it took me a long time to realize that I could be a writer, that it was like, I should allow myself to be a writer almost. So it wasn't until Burnt Roti, it truly wasn't until that magazine. And when The Guardian first let me write an article, when The Guardian first published one of my articles, that I realized that it's something that I wanted to do more. I realized that writing, it wasn't just editing and helping people with their stories. I wanted to tell more of mine, and I wanted to be a writer. And like, I have this like end goal as well, which I was just telling my friend on the weekend about. And she's very excited about it. So I'm going to tell you all. So my end goal as a writer is to write the most perfect horror film. Like that's what I want in life. And it took me a long time to realize that that's okay to have, and that's acceptable. And also that's extremely cool. So like embrace it, you know. So it takes me, it's an ongoing journey, you know. It's until very recently I've been able to say that, you know, wanting to be a writer and finding yourself within that space and being comfortable and almost allowing yourself to be a writer took me, I'm 38 now. It took me a long time. I'm not going to count the years, a long time to get to that stage. So I still think the journey's ongoing. I still think there'll be moments where I'll be like, oh no, actually it's this I want to do instead in the theme of like, you know, creativity or writing. So yeah, it's ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I love that. So we got a question from the audience here. How much is your writing tailored to your various audiences throughout the world, or is it a consideration at this point in your career?
Yeah, so I think at first it was very tailored. At first, I was very conscious of my readers. I stopped looking at the demographics on my websites now and my social media. I decided that was actually stopping me from being able to write my true self and to write the truest way I possibly could, because I was appeasing to an audience, or I was almost, I don't know, pushing people away. Which I realized that wasn't the point of my writing. It was for everyone, so they can all understand and they can go through the process with me, or like, you know, if there were people within privilege, they can see why and how by reading my writing, you know. And I realized I needed to move away from that. So now it's more of a consideration to myself. So it's a consideration to my true self, my true voice. And it's for everyone. Like everyone should be reading, everyone's writing anyway, right? Like you should be reading every viewpoint, everyone's journey and path. So no longer do I write for an audience. I guess I kind of write for like a young Sharan, for like baby Sharan. Like, you know, she would have liked to have read stuff like this, you know, she would have thought this was cool. So I guess, yeah, I write to me now instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that. So then another question, and this is something I wanted to touch back on as well, which was your journey to get an agent, because it's a big step. It's a big process. So do you mind expanding a little bit on how you got to the agent you got to? And then the exact question was, what was your agent's name and agency?
Mm-hmm. So the agency is the Good Literary Agency. It's a UK-based agency, and my agent is Abby Fellows. They've got a few agents on their books, but Abby is a queen, like for real. They take submissions in a lot. So the Good Literary Agency works with underrepresented groups. So they work with queer people, people of color, and people with disabilities, neurodivergent people. So they have people on their books that are essentially not represented in the publishing world, which is a big issue. The publishing world sucks a lot of the time. And so they're really good with things like that. So I guess that kind of like explains a lot of my journey as well to getting an agent. But it started with a Google search and a lot of panicking and screaming. And that's when I realized I should be reaching out to people. I think there's a lot of like ego as well when it comes to like, you know, going into the world of publishing and finding an agent, where I was just like, well, why aren't they coming to me? You know, like Sharan, no one knows you. That's why. So I was like, I had to reach out to all my friends who are authors or were like in publishing in some form, and say, hey, I'm looking for an agent. Can you help me? Or like, what is the process? How do you do this? Do you audition them? Is that for real? Like what happens? And so like a bunch of people told me just to like email. There's no harm in email. So they were like, email as many agents in agencies who you like the bio of and the people that they already represent. When you like that, then just send them an email telling them who you are, what you do, what you want to talk about, and any ideas you have. So I was like, okay, that sounds easy. I sent out so many emails. Oh my God. I sent out basically to every agent out there. Like, I was like, yeah, I love you. I love your work. I love everyone you represent. Like, I just wanted an agent at that point. I didn't care who it was. And I didn't get that many responses. I got four. I think I got 4 responses. out of the hundreds I sent out, which was kind of like interesting, humbling. But no, it was good because it made me realize that I wasn't doing it right. I had to really focus on who I wanted to reach to. And so it was those people that then came back to me, the right people. So I met up with them. I met up with various agents and we had conversations. We went for a coffee and we chatted about me, basically, the things I want, what I want in my career, what I want in an agent as well, which was an interesting question because I wasn't sure at that point because I didn't really know what an agent really did. So it was quite an interesting back and forth a lot of the time of me being like, okay, but what do you do and how do you do it? And then like, what is a proposal? And do you send everything? And then what do I do? And like all of this stuff, like I asked them everything. And I was like, I'm so sorry if I seem really dumb. And they were like, no, this is like what you meant to do. You meant I was like, okay, thank God. So I asked them everything. And it then got to a point where, so I'd done 4 coffee dates, as I call them, coffee dates with agents, which were all cute. And then I ended up dating my agent, is how I call it, after going on 4 dates with 4 various ones. Because what ended up happening is when we were talking about like what they do, what the Good Literary Agency do, and what I want to do, it sat in line better. What ended up happening is with one of the agents, I found out that they represent someone who's transphobic. So I sent them an email saying, apologies, I can't be part of your agency because of the person that you represent. I hope you understand. So it's that kind of like thing I did. I did a lot of research as well, because I realized that, you know, if I was going to put myself out there that much further, you know, there's a bigger chance of people like, you know, disliking me or like, you know, like canceling me, which I kind of, you know, I would embrace if you want to cancel me. You know, like I do want to live on a deserted island somewhere where no one knows me. But like, you know, I was like, I need to be a bit careful about who I like side with. And so it was a process. I did a lot of research and I ended up going with Abby at the Good Literary Agency because their values were perfection. And I saw who she represents. I knew some of those people and they're such good people who had already written such beautiful things. So I just knew it would fit me. And so then she put together a contract. The Good Literary Agency put together a contract, which we went through for a while. Because again, like she exists to deal with contracts. But when it was a contract with her, I was like, oh, babes, like, I don't know contracts. You're going to have to help me. So we went through the process of what everything meant and then finally signed off, which was a really nice, beautiful experience as well. There was no stress. It wasn't uncomfortable. And that's also when I knew I was in the right place. So that was the journey of getting an agent. And then got the agent and the next day went into lockdown. My journey's been interesting, really.
Sounds like it.
Like the worst.
So then last 2 questions for you. The first one I want to ask, you've given so much good advice so far, but if you were to boil all of your advice down to one thing you would tell writers that want to break in, what would you tell them? This is something that I'm going to steal it. So my friend said this to me. I don't care. He's not here. That he said, your story matters. And it was really important for me to hear that because I like I said, with the imposter syndrome and a lot of the time just like questioning yourself, like I didn't really believe anyone wants to hear what I had to say. But like, it's really important for everyone to realize that your story matters. Like everyone has something to say. Everyone's experienced something. Everyone has something to say. Everyone has creativity and an idea. Everyone has a story. And someone out there wants to read it. Like people have read my book, this person, like people want to read stuff, like, and what you have to say has value because you as a person has value, you know, as a human that exists, your value is retained within that. And then when you write something that's even more beautiful, even more creative and, you know, wonderful. So everyone wants it. So I guess, yeah, I think it's important for me to like say that to as many people as possible. Like, you know, your story and your idea matters because you're a human and that's you right. matter. I like it. And then last but certainly not least, what do you have to promote? Where can people find you online, on social media? Where can they find your book? All that good stuff.
Yes. So my book, Burning My Roti, is in all good bookstores. I tell everyone, don't buy it from Amazon, even though that apparently hurts my, like, I don't know, being on list thing, but I don't care. Buy it from all the independent bookshops you possibly can. Hive is good. Bookseller is good. There's a bunch of queer bookshops that you can buy it from as well. So yeah, buy my book. Also buy it for like the design and the artwork. It is stunning. It should be put in like a gallery. Like, it's beautiful. So yeah, do that. My social media handles for Burnt Roti is Burnt Roti Mag on Twitter and Instagram. We're more active on Instagram than Twitter. And then my personal socials are Sharan Dhaliwal _ on Instagram and Twitter. Twitter is mostly rants, so I'd go there if I were you. And Burnt Roti has recently released an issue. I think it was last month. What are we in? May, June? Yeah. So it was 2 months ago. We released our latest issue, which is trans and non-binary South Asians. And so we gave them a platform to have conversations, show their amazing photography and artwork, to promote their businesses. It's a really cool issue, and it's got like 3 amazing trans activists on the cover. So go buy that as well. And also maybe other things that I can't remember.
And I'll include links to all those in the show notes. So if you didn't follow them, I'll include links to social, to where to get all that stuff in the show notes. So Sharan, thank you so much for being here today. This was a lot of fun. Thank you. No,
thank you so much. Thank you. I had a great time.
So to all of our listeners, thank you for being here. We're back tomorrow. We have another episode tomorrow. So we will see you then. And thanks for stopping by.